participant screen sharing. We got recording. Let's see if I'm still getting a message that screen share is disabled.
Okay, I just hit the button, so give her one more try.
Okay. And let's see, this is the screen I want to share. So you should be seeing a screen that is chapter 7 right now.
All righty, with that, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. If I see you haven't muted yourself, I'm going to hop in and do that. And again, if you have any questions, text them to me, and we will look forward to after an hour. Jim will take a break if you're not almost done then. Any questions? Take it away. Take it away, Jim.
And feel free to interrupt me, Bob, if there are questions. You know, I tell people nobody interrupts my train of thought more than I do. So Rebecca covered chapter 6 last week, and that was the marine transportation system. Chapter 7 covers the auxiliary support for the Coast Guard's marine transportation system. So we're going to work through that. And let me see exactly how I can advance this. I've got 2 screens here and I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. Let's see. Get rid of this. Blow this up. And let's see if this is going to work. Hang on. For some reason, this is not working for me. Hang on. Let's try this differently. All right. Let me try booting that up again. If I can. I'm sorry about this. I should have.
No worries. While you're plugging away on this, we'll put in a TV commercial here. This class is going very well. We appreciate all your support and participation. While Jim is working on that, I will tell you that we are planning on doing an auxiliary seamanship course, perhaps as early as August. We'll just have to see how this one finishes up. I'm very dependent on you all to take that test so that we feel like our time and energy is worth it to put forth these classes. But Jim, what questions do you have here? Is it working, Jim?
It is, I think.
All righty.
Let me see. Let me see again. It was working. It looks like it was working. I'm not sure why. Let me close some things out and reboot this. Let's try this. No. All right.
So what I can try to do is I can make you a complete host, Jim. That would perhaps help you.
Well, it may or may not work. Hang on. I may have to start this over. Okay, let's try this. I don't want that. I want this. Let's see whether this will work.
So Monique suggested if you're using 2 screens, make sure your cursor is moving on the screen that you want displayed.
All right, are you getting a display from me at all now?
I can see chapter 7. Let's see if you can advance it one.
All right. Yep.
All right. I'm gonna,
Okay. I had to get rid of some extraneous stuff. So I apologize for that. But it looks like this may work. So chapter 7, this is the outline. We're going to track through maritime observation missions. We're going to talk about abandoned vessels and barges. We're going to talk about Harbor Safety Committee support, chart updating, and bridge administration. And we're going to finish off chapter 7 with aids to navigation. So that's where we're going. As you probably know, and as you said, Bob, these are short chapters, but there is actually quite a bit of information that we can pull out of these as we go through. So let's talk about maritime observation missions for a bit. And there's an illustration there of a patrol here in the Milwaukee area. And so what does a marine observation mission give us? What assets do we have in terms of a maritime observation mission? We've got a trained team of auxiliarists, right? They've been through the boat crew program. They put time on the water. We've got a vessel, which gives us an opportunity to get into places where normally we would not necessarily get into, backwater areas, areas that aren't real accessible by road sometimes. So it's a platform that gives us access to a variety of places that could be safety and security issues. We also have, as part of that trained team, we have people who are familiar with their local area, oftentimes more familiar with that local area than the Coast Guard might be. So the goal of maritime observation missions, increased domain awareness. And what does that mean? That word domain. It's not something that deals with a website in this case, but domain is a sphere of activity or a sphere of knowledge. It's what we're familiar with. It's where we live, where we work, where we recreate. It's what we know. So we're in a good position as auxiliarists in our local areas to increase that domain awareness. And we do that by observing what's going on out there. We can make recording notes or pictures or videos, audio recordings, depending upon what's appropriate. And when we're out on the water, we always have contact with the Coast Guard. We can report those findings to the Coast Guard fairly easily. The auxiliary is authorized to do these kinds of missions in all activities, all areas where anybody in the boating public, anybody who's a citizen, is not prohibited from being there. So if it's open to anybody else, it's open to us as well. And some of the things that we can observe on the waterways and in the ports where we are, vessels move in and out of harbors. They can be recreational vessels. They can be commercial vessels. Those vessels may have some environmental concerns. They may have some safety or security concerns. We're familiar with land-based structures, what's going on in our harbors, our marinas, our commercial buildings, port facilities, power plants, those kinds of things. So land-based infrastructure also that could be a target for some sort of untoward activity, or perhaps be vulnerable to something from the outside. And it's a matter of, in most cases, it's a matter of see something, say something. It's what we try to promote with America's Waterways Watch as well. We're out there, we're seeing things, we can do that. And some of the other activities that these maritime observation missions support, checking the correct locations of ATONs, aids to navigation, and private aids. And we can talk about that a little bit toward the end of this chapter. And also chart updating, keeping the charts current. I'm taking a little different perspective on review questions in this presentation. Because Chapter 7, for some reason, has 8 review questions associated with it. They managed to pull 8 questions out of 3 pages, and there's nothing out of Chapter 8. So what I thought I would do is, rather than waiting until we get through all of the material, I thought I would throw the review questions in after we've covered that particular aspect of the material. So this is review question number 7, if you're following along with the review questions. And the review question says, the blank provides sectors with a trained team and reporting platform for a wide range of safety and security issues in the waterway while presenting a Coast Guard presence. And these are the choices: the Good Mate Program, Maritime Observation Mission, Dock Walker Program, and the Commercial Fishing Vessel Examiner Program. And the correct answer is
B.
B.
B. Like
B
a
as a
boy.
boy.
B as in boy, or Bravo, correct. Maritime
Or Bravo,
Observation
yeah.
Mission. Okay, good. All right, let's talk a little bit about abandoned vessels and barges. And I took a picture of a barge. This barge is not abandoned. It just happens to be in the river here nearby. And you see a couple of tugboats. And at least it was a nice picture of a barge. But let's think about what happens if vessels like this become abandoned, left unattended for a period of time. So what kinds of threats do these things pose? Abandoned vessels, abandoned barges. Well, if they sink, if they're sticking out into the waterway, they can be hazards to navigation, sunken obstacles, narrowing of channels. If they start drifting around, they're going to do damage to the environment, damage to other boats, those kinds of things. Depending upon if they have cargo or not, whether that cargo is environmentally harmful or dangerous, if any of that cargo spills into the waterway or people come in contact with it. Habitat degradation, as these things impact shorelines and impact the bottom of riverways and waterways, lakes, oceans. All of those kinds of things pose threats to safety and to the environment. And they do that not just here in places like the Great Lakes, but they actually do that nationwide. So in 1992, the General Accountability Office recommended that the Coast Guard develop an accurate inventory of such vessels. Try and figure out where they are and what kinds of hazards they might pose. So Congress took the GAO's recommendation and enacted the Abandoned Barge Act of 1992. And that act prohibits the abandonment of barges that are greater than 100 tons, 100 gross tons. It provides for a civil penalty of up to $1,000 a day for such abandonment, and it allows the Coast Guard to remove abandoned barges, abandoned vessels. And what constitutes abandonment? The definition is that if it's unattended for more than 45 days, it can be considered abandoned. And the auxiliary supports this program, again, through training, but also through conducting those maritime observation missions in areas where they're familiar to locate, to identify, and to classify these abandoned vessels. There are entities called local harbor safety committees. And I'm not sure whether you have harbor safety committees in your area. We have a harbor safety committee here in Milwaukee. We have auxiliarists who attend harbor safety committee meetings. We have an auxiliarist who actually chairs the harbor safety committee here in the Milwaukee area. So harbor safety committees they're coordinating bodies, really. They're really kind of a loose aggregation of a whole variety of interests, which we'll talk about. And that coordinating body addresses local maritime transportation issues. It provides a forum for facility operators, port users, and other interested parties like recreational boaters, fishermen, anglers, charter and tour operators, just a whole host of users of a waterway in a port area can sit in on and offer comment at the Harbor Safety Committee meetings. And the Coast Guard always has a fairly substantial presence there, not so much to do presentations as much as to listen, hear what's going on, maybe respond to questions, those kinds of things. As I mentioned, I think I attend as an auxiliarist, but I wear a couple of other hats too. I'm a member of Milwaukee County's Local Emergency Planning Committee, which deals with planning for hazardous materials spills. And I also have an affiliation at the local university's School of Freshwater Sciences, and all of this impacts water and water interfaces with all of that. So I attend not just as an auxiliarist, but I attend as an interested party in a whole variety of capacities, really. So what kinds of issues come up? Safety issues, mobility issues, environmental protection issues. I can tell you that here, fairly recently, some of the issues that have been discussed have centered around multiple users, congestion on our waterways. I mean, here in Milwaukee Harbor, which isn't that huge, really, by harbor standards, port standards. I mean, we have cruise ships that come in. We have cargo vessels that visit our port. We have fairly good-sized harbor tour boats. We have pontoon boats, some of which are rented and some of which are chartered, if you will, or they're small passenger vessels. There are other kinds of livery rentals. There are canoes and kayaks and pontoon boats and that are paddle taverns. We have a paddle tavern or two. We have recreational power boats, of course, and all of those users expect certain things out of the waterway. They have certain needs. They have certain expectations as to how they're going to be able to move through the waterway. And you can imagine that, there are user conflicts that come up. And the Harbor Safety Committee is a forum for those kinds of things. We also have heard complaints about illegal uninspected passenger vessel operators, not so much with our charter fishermen, but more with owners who are operators who are renting pontoon boats for use on the harbor. We get dredging issues, and the constraints that dredging causes. We get bridge operations that may be part of the whole user conflict kind of thing with why doesn't the bridge open at this particular time? Why don't we have some sort of precedence over that? We have a lot of development along our rivers, so what was once a relatively open channel now can have recreational boat slips on both sides of that channel. So there's a lot of recreational and commercial development. So all of those things are topics that we have heard about, have addressed, have discussed at the local harbor safety committee meetings. And those harbor safety committees can provide recommendations to the Coast Guard, and they can also serve as a sounding board then for the Coast Guard to review and consider recommendations. And for recording purposes or mission hours purposes, auxiliary involvement in harbor safety committee activities is a marine safety mission. And it's counted as 70F, Waterways Management Support. It's specifically mentioned under the guidelines for recording that particular involvement in harbor safety committee. So if you're involved in your harbor safety committee or you get involved in your harbor safety committee, every one of those hours that you spend at the committee meetings, et cetera, or preparing for them can count as waterways management support. So, review questions. This is question number 19. Harbor safety committees are composed of sector commanders, auxiliary division commanders, and prevention officers. Sector commanders, logistics staff officers, and auxiliary members. Prevention staff, logistics staff, and the harbor master. Or none of the choices. And the answer is none of the choices, right? I heard none of the choices. Now, all of those people that are listed up there, sector commanders, division commanders, all of those people are certainly welcome to attend, and many of them may on various occasions attend. I know that a lot of the marine safety staff from sector Lake Michigan regularly attends the harbor safety committee meeting for Milwaukee. So, all right. Moving on from harbor safety committees, let's talk about, was there a question?
What is the answer? I mean, I know it's D, but if that doesn't say anything to me. Is it security, safety, and mobility and protection of the environment?
Harbor safety committees?
Yes.
Well, all of those things are involved. I mean, they're all part of the discussion. I mean, if you're talking about multiple user conflicts in a harbor like Milwaukee, you're certainly talking about safety. You could be talking about the environment as well.
Okay, then I was right. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. One more. Okay. So, support for NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers with chart updating. Okay. I put an example of a chart up there, and of course, charts provide those of us on the water with really the best map that we can possibly have or it should be the best map that we can possibly have of the obstructions that are out there, of the signposts that guide us in and out of harbors, water depths, all of those kinds of things. And so it's important that, because things change. I mean, this is a moving environment. Water makes changes to things. Development comes along and makes changes to things. Things move around out there. And so having the most up-to-date chart is really a key to keeping everyone safe out there. So auxiliary members are encouraged to provide current and reliable information so that charts can be updated for safe and efficient navigation. Observers are given specific guidelines for making measurements and ensuring that quality reports are submitted for each of the observations that they make, because you want to have the best information possible. The focus of a chart updating support effort is prevention, accuracy, credibility, and professionalism. So the first is prevention of incidents out there, identifying all of the things that have changed, the things that need mentioning in terms of what's going to present a hazard, etc. Accuracy, we need to accurately represent those particular hazards. Where are they? What do they look like? How do we classify them, etc. And then credibility. Is it believable? Is it trustworthy? And professionalism. We're making sure that as we make these observations, as we make these reports, that we're really looking at things that need to be on charts, not just anything, but things that will actually be of value to the mariner. And that's why there are specific guidelines as to making these on-scene observations. So if you're going to do a chart updating mission, if you will, each update task is clearly defined. The on-scene observations that you make are noted, they're listed, and then you're really asked to develop a conclusion based on the efforts that you've gathered, the evidence rather that you've gathered, and make a final recommendation that gets passed on to NOAA. Okay? All right. We're going to talk about the support for the Bridge Administration Program. And I put a picture of a bridge in here that, didn't want to do that. Moved my cursor over the screen so I could point this out. So this is a it's a dual span bridge. Actually, it's split in the middle here. So this is a double leaf bascule bridge. It lifts here and here, heads on up to leave a completely open channel above that river, so that boats really of any height can pass through that. So in terms of the bridge and bridges, what we're looking at is the repairs, the lighting, all of those kinds of things. So auxiliary members provide assistance to the Coast Guard by making observations and making reports on discrepancies on bridges under the Coast Guard jurisdiction in federal waterways. And I think in an earlier session, we heard something about the number of bridges, and the Coast Guard monitors approximately 20,000 bridges across federal waters, navigable waters throughout the country, and ensures that those bridges are not unreasonable obstructions to navigation. The thing that allows the Coast Guard Auxiliary to make these kinds of observations is a memorandum of understanding between the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And the manual refers to a reference. It refers to the Coast Guard Bridge Administration Manual. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit more. And that manual is something like 400 pages of various administrative issues and those kinds of things. And then there are a number of enclosures, and then the enclosures become almost more important or more interest to us than the manual itself. There are only probably a few sections of the manual that are really, really pertinent to what we do. The bridge program has two main components, and we'll talk about each of these in turn, but they're bridge discrepancy reports and their annual bridge surveys. Those are the two main components of the bridge, of the bridge program. But before we get to that, I wanted to show you, this is the cover of the Bridge Administration Manual. As I said, it's referenced in your IMSEP guide. You can get a copy of it if you want. I would encourage you to take a look at it. There is a review question that relates to the manual, but not so much to the manual itself. As I said, it's 400 pages. It's highly detailed, but one of the enclosures to that manual is the Memorandum of Understanding between the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard Auxiliary. The other enclosure, enclosure 6, I think is probably more valuable. It's bridge lighting and other signals. This is enclosure 6 to the manual. And this is the kind of stuff you find in that manual, in that enclosure 6. So here we've got a fixed span, fixed bridge, single span, and we've got two actual illustrations of it, two different versions, if you will. So here we're looking at it as we might come upon it going upstream or downstream. This is looking at it from the top. And the difference between these two is that this one has support piers on land, no water on either side of that bridge, one way or the other here, whereas this one is actually supported on piers that are out in the middle of the water. There's still only one channel through here where boat traffic is really encouraged to go. I mean, it may be less, it may be shallower here. Maybe small boats can get through there, but so the markings on this, you have a green light in the center of the channel. So that marks the safe water, the green light. And you'll notice that there's one on the upstream, one on the downstream side of each of these bridges. So depending upon which side you're approaching it from, you're going to see that green light. You don't want to stray outside of the channel. So on this bridge, they put a red light on to mark the sides of the channel, again, upstream and downstream. On this one, because the piers are in the water, that red light is not up high on the bridge. That red light is on the pier or the support structure down closer to the water, so that it becomes more obvious that you want to go through those through that passageway. That's one of the simplest examples of lighting of a bridge. There is, however, or are, however, many more complex examples of bridge lighting, and this is certainly one of those. This is a truss type bridge, probably a railroad bridge. We have bridges like this here in the river system, and again, as you're approaching from downstream or upstream, you're going to see a number of red lights that mark the openings to that that bridge. But in this case, when the bridge is closed, you're going to see a red light in the center over that center pivot, that pier. And you're going to see another red that effectively marks the side of that channel, the side of this channel. You can pass these bridges on either side, by the way. Depends upon what's going on the waterway. And the most important thing to note on a bridge like this is that when that bridge opens, that bridge is going to swing so that it's now parallel to the channels. It's not going to be across the channel. It's going to be parallel to the channels. The channels are now open, and you want the excuse me, you want the indication that it's safe to pass. So if you look at these lights and this one, and this one, these are lights. This is this light. This is this one. This is this one. Notice that they're sectioned in quadrants that are red and green, so that when that bridge swings, what you now see on the top of the bridge and at this position, facing you upstream or downstream, are green lights. So there's lighting configurations that you can use to tell whether that bridge is in a position so that you can go through or not. Lift bridges, double leaf bascules, there's different lighting configurations on each of those. So if you're going to check lighting configurations on bridges, you need to know what the lighting configurations should be. Okay, here's another review question. Number 20, minimum lighting for a single span fixed bridge, which is the first one we looked at, is a green light marking the center of the channel, red light marking each side pier, a green light marking starboard, a red light marking port, red and green to show which vessel is stand on, or none of the choices. And the answer is
A.
Alpha, A alpha. Green light, center of the channel, red light marking each side pier. So here's an example picture of one of those trestle type bridges that this one's actually been abandoned. It was the main passenger line into Milwaukee by the Chicago Northwestern at some point. But that bridge is permanently open at this point. There's one side, the connection has actually been converted into a little park. The other side, it really doesn't stick out very far into the water. So I haven't checked lighting on this bridge, but it should still be lighted. I don't honestly know who owns it, but I doubt it. I doubt that the railroad still owns it. It's probably been abandoned by the railroad. Excuse me. So problems that are identified by auxiliarists on bridges can be reported anytime. You do not have to be on patrol. You do not have to be on the water. You can be on a recreational boat with your family on a weekend. You can be driving by and make observations from the shoreline as to whether the lighting configurations are correct. The report, any report is made to the Coast Guard through the district bridge reporting channel. And you can do a search for your district's bridge reporting program, or I know I looked up District 9's bridge reporting program. I found the contact information for the person in Cleveland who through whom you can make or to whom you can make reports. If you have trouble finding out who you should make reports to, you can check with your division staff officer for navigation systems or your district staff officer for navigation systems. They should know how you can make those reports. If you see a discrepancy, it should be reported within 24 hours, especially on bridges that are, active. There's active waterways. Somebody needs to know that that's not lighted properly or that there is an issue. And coxswains are encouraged to keep bridge discrepancy forms on board their facilities. The discrepancy form is NS7055, and I'll show you a picture of it in just a bit. It's got all the information you need in order to make the report. Once the report is made, the Coast Guard Bridge Branch is going to make the contact to the owner of the bridge to repair the discrepancy. Okay, so there were the two major components, and the first one was the discrepancy reports. The second one is the annual bridge surveys. And these are comprehensive reviews and reports. They ensure that the bridges meet the Coast Guard permit requirements. So if you put something out there that's a bridge, it needs to be permitted by the Coast Guard if it's over federal navigable waters. The Coast Guard wants to ensure that those bridges meet those permit requirements. So there are annual bridge surveys. The surveys require that you make observations both day and night. You want to see that the bridge is operating properly during the day and it's lighted properly at night. If there's a tidal consideration, you'll look at them at low and high tide. You're going to look at operation of the bridge. So you want to probably be in a position to see it open and closed. If it's that sort of a bridge, you want to see it open and closed. So it requires a fair amount of time in order to really do that well. There's a copy of the NS7055, and this is a whole listing here, which I'm sure you can't read, and don't worry about it. These are all the possible issues that you could have with a bridge, so you can check them off. You can write comments down here. And in both the discrepancy reports and the comprehensive annual surveys, these are the kinds of things that you look for. We've been talking about lights, and it's why I spent a little bit of time on lights. It's one of the obvious things. The lights on those bridges is something that would be checked. Fendering systems, the things that protect the bridge from damage and protect boats from damage as they're going through. Channel obstructions. Parts of bridges can actually break off at times. There may be wooden structures that serve as, bumpers, if you will, and some of those over time may deteriorate, come partially out into the water. They then provide obstructions in the channel. Some of the metal or the concrete may break away and it becomes an obstruction. Regulatory signs need to be in place and legible. Tide clearance gauges, again, in place, legible. And then bridge signaling and bridge operations. Again, you're going to want to see that bridge actually function, actually open. So, all right, review question. Bridge operation, channel obstructions, and navigation lights are examined in bridge surveys and bridge discrepancy reports, NOAA chart updating activities, the work of the Army Corps of Engineers, all of the choices. And the correct answer is
A.
A.
A alpha. Right. The next review question says bridge operation. Sorry. Next question says fendering systems, regulatory signs, and tide clearance gauges are examined in bridge surveys and bridge discrepancy reports, NOAA chart updating activities, the work of the Army Corps of Engineers, all of the choices. Are they throwing us a curve here by putting all of the same choices in there? So what's the
No.
correct answer?
A.
A.
The same. All of those things were, we just talked about, listed on that earlier slide. Okay.
Jim, it's Rebecca. So, do you have to be an ATON verifier in order to report discrepancies?
I don't believe so. I'm not sure about that though, Rebecca.
I can interject. Anybody can report a discrepancy, but a verification has to be by somebody who has the qualification.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. So support to ATON and private aid. So aids to navigation and private aids to navigation. That's ATON versus PATON. So in the federal navigable waters, ATONs, aids to navigation, federal navigable waters, federal aids are they're maintained by the Coast Guard, usually put in place by the Coast Guard. They're part of the Coast Guard's direct responsibility, and in terms of placement, and maintenance. Okay, so auxiliarists can report discrepancies on federal short-range aids to navigation. And what does the term short range mean? All navigational devices that are essentially within sensible or the ability to sense range. So that's lights, lighthouses, lighted buoys, ranges, just a whole variety of lights, something that we can see visually. Day beacons, whether they're lighted or not, they would fall into that. I mentioned buoys, lighted or not. I mean, those are visual. Sound signals, foghorns, bell buoys, those kinds of things would be part of short range ATON. Radar beacons, because if you have a radar system on your boat, you can pick up those radar beacons. And AIS, the automated identification system. You may have equipment to pick that up. Those are all parts of the short range navigation, aids to navigation system. The auxiliary supports the Coast Guard, especially in backwater areas, more remote areas. So I said these things were maintained by the Coast Guard, but the Coast Guard doesn't always get or can't always get into some of these backwater and remote areas at all times of the year, and we may be able to. So they may ask us to do that. And sometimes even in the more well-traveled waterways, especially if there's been stormy weather, wintertime icing, strong current conditions that may have moved aids to navigation off their position, we may be asked to get in there and help them verify it. When Coast Guard resources are strained, they may not have the personnel the opportunities to get out there and do all of these aids. So we may be asked to step in and help in that situation. So this is something like the answer to the question that we had about bridges. All auxiliary members at any time may check and report on every federal aid in their area. You make your report to the local Coast Guard Aid to Navigation team, Coast Guard ANT team. You don't make reports if an aid is watching properly. So you go past the lighthouse every day and you see it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. You don't make that report. You only make the report if it's not doing something, if it's not functioning correctly. That's the watching properly term, okay? The other time to make reports is when the Coast Guard specifically requests a check on a particular aid, maybe because they were notified of a problem, maybe because there was a storm in the area, something like that. The private aid to navigation support program is really, from my experience, more extensive. I've got the aid verifier qualification. I've only had it for a couple of years, and this is primarily private aids to navigation, and it can be a fairly extensive list. I got a list from our district staff officer with 55 aids in the area to verify over the course of a couple of months. So private aids can be set in navigable waters, but only with the permission of the Coast Guard. So the Coast Guard gets all of the information. They end up putting it in the light list. And these private aids can be very similar to the federal aids. They can mark the sides of channels. So they can be lateral marks. They can mark wrecks or hazards. They can provide information. They can mark research sampling equipment. We have any number of buoys here in the Great Lakes that are part of a Great Lakes observing system. And I know ocean shorelines, ocean areas have the International Ocean Observing System. Those buoys that go out there, they're permitted. They become listed in the light list, and they end up providing a great deal of data that is often readily accessible. Private aids are maintained by the owner at the expense of the owner. The Coast Guard issues the permits, enforces compliance, but generally relies on us for these verifications. Once they get a verification that something is wrong, they will order corrective action, and they issue notice to mariners. They'll put it in a local notice to mariners. They issue broadcast notice to mariners. When they do broadcast notice to mariners, I get an email. I've subscribed to an email list that sends me those broadcast notice to mariners. So the auxiliary is responsible for verifying all of the private aids to navigation, all of the PATON, on a periodic basis, and that basis or that time frame is set by the Coast Guard. So not every private aid gets verified here in this area every year. There's only a select number of them that the Coast Guard says, okay, it's time to verify that one. Let's go out and do it. Those verifications can only be done by someone with the aid verifier qualification. Aid verifiers can also report private aids that have not been permitted. So somebody puts something in, it doesn't appear anywhere, it's not in the light list, but it's out there. It's in public water. And you suspect or know it's not a permitted private aid. as an aid verifier, you can report that and should report that. All auxiliarists anytime can report discrepancies. It's not a verification, it's a report of a discrepancy made to, again, the local ANT office, probably, closest ANT office, and then they will take whatever action is necessary. Okay, couple more review questions, and then we're done with chapter 7. Question 23, auxiliarists assist the Coast Guard in the Aid to Navigation program by checking federal payton, private aids, both federal, private, and private aids and ATON, both A and B, neither private aids nor the federal ATON. And the correct answer is, pardon me?
B as in Bravo.
B as in Bravo, or maybe C, because it includes everything. I'm not sure it's worded exactly the way it should be. Probably should have said only federal private aids to navigation under A there, rather than assuming it. Okay.
Yeah, that is a bit tricky. It could be B or C.
It could be, but the answer they want here is B, Bravo. Question 24. How often does payton verification occur? Annually? The time is set by the owner. The time is set by the Coast Guard. None of the choices. And the correct answer is?
C.
Darling. Time is set by the Coast Guard. And the last review question of the set, and the last one that relates to chapter 7, true or false, using the vertical and horizontal error calculator from that website on the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary Prevention Department NS Division webpage, it is possible to estimate the distance in nautical miles and in meters, how far an object like an ATON or a payton is off station. Is that true or false? And was anybody able to
False.
find that?
False.
False.
Was anybody able to find that?
I found it somewhere.
I don't know that it's measured in meters. It's sort of a trick question.
Well, you know, I looked at the Prevention Department Navigation Systems webpage. I was not able to find anything called the vertical and horizontal error calculator. I did find something called the Navigation Systems Calculator that allowed me to use GPS locational data, you know, both the observed and the published data. So what I found if I'm on the water versus what's in the light list, and that would give me the distance off station. But I couldn't find anywhere where there was a vertical horizontal error calculator. And so that was the answer I came up with.
Yeah, I think the gotcha is the meters, because they don't use the English system, they use the US system. So this is a real tricky one.
Yeah. Okay. That is chapter 7. So I was able to pull a bunch of information out of 3 pages in the book, and I'm sorry if it was too much.
Fantastic.
No,
Question.
it was excellent.
So yes, if there are questions, we can try and address them. If I don't know the answer, normally I would say if I don't know the answer, I'll make one up. But in this case, if I don't know the answer, somebody out there will.
Okay, I have a question on review questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, we only have 25 review questions. Is there something somewhere I'm missing any more of them?
No.
It's a teaser. They don't give you all the possible questions that could appear on the test, because like I mentioned, I think it was the last week or was the week before, it's an open book exam. So you're going to have the option to to go through the marine safety manual and look up, certain things.
Sure.
And the bridge guide that Jim mentioned, that also is going to have information in it that you can search. So no, they don't give you all the questions you're going to find in the final exam. Good question. Other
Thank you.
question. Ernie, did you want to share briefly about your experiences before we take a quick break here? Are you there, Ernie? You sent a message out and I thought, well, we'll bring that up at the break. You there, Ernie? You want me to unmute you? Maybe I got it here. You know how to hit the unmute button, Ernie? It's on the bottom. You just get your little mouse and put it at the bottom of the screen where it says mute. Yeah, so what were you saying about your experience with 8th Western, Ernie? Are you there, Ernie? Sounds like his microphone's acting up. All right, team. What do you want to take a break till 10 minutes after the hour, and then we'll resume on with chapter 8. We've got a whole nother chapter to go, so don't leave us.
Yeah, but
Hey,
it'll
Bob.
be shorter. I won't take as long.
Good. All
Bob,
right.
yeah, this is Mike. But right before you go, I want to add in about that ATON and the GPS and the location of your ATONs.
Yes.
On the Mackinac, they said they use GPS locator on the Winchosaurus to drop the ATONs in the water when they're switching them out.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
That would be that would certainly be the easiest thing to do. I mean, trying to shoot bearings would take a lot longer. So GPS would be the way to do it.
Yeah, and they have it on the Winchosaurus. They are right there. Who's ever the bosun's mate, who's ever put the buoy in the water, has a computer right there, and he does it, and they place it right there and they mark it.
Right on. Ernie just sent a
Okay.
message that his throat's bugging him a little bit, so we won't be able to have him explain it, but you can all read in the comments. Ernie's had a wonderful experience. So let's go ahead and what do you think? Jim, you want to come back at quarter after now?
Yeah, either way, I mean, how many, it's up to people how long they really want to take. I don't need to do too much here, so. In
All right,
terms
well,
of,
sounds good. Well, let's get back together at 10 after the hour. So if you guys need to stay away briefly to take care of business, we'll look forward to seeing you here at 10 after the hour. And we'll talk to you soon.
Could I ask one more question?
sure.
Since you're here, the observer and the verifier. Now, if anyone could do the observing, but you said only if you have the credentials you could verify. I
Right.
understood all that, but I'm not clear on the difference between observing and verifying in this case.
Well, observing may not be as detailed, if you will. In other words, let's say that you're out on patrol or on a recreational boat on a weekend, and you go past a buoy, and you think that buoy is out of sight, out of position. Okay. Because you know about where it should be, and it looks like it's drifted significantly. So you take a GPS reading of it, or maybe you don't have GPS. Maybe you just, based on what you know from going in and out of that waterway, that buoy is out of position. So you make an observation and a report that the buoy is likely out of position. Verification would be the Coast Guard sending someone with an aid verifier qualification to actually go out there and either using GPS or bearings and things like that to actually verify what the position is, to check that that is or is not where it's supposed to be based on what's in the light list, which would be the permit information. And so I think the difference is that what you do as an aid verifier is more detailed. And I know when I do a verification on an aid, I have a number of things that I have to look for. I have to verify it so that it matches the light list. And I fill out an actual report, a report form that goes off to the ant group, the ant station.
Can I say
So-
something? Because I think it's somebody.
Excellent. Thank
who's
you
actually
very
in-
much.
I think
Yeah,
they're
go ahead.
actually.
Go ahead.
I think the question came from someone in Florida who is probably under St. Pete, the same as we are. I can tell you from experience, found something that had been hit by a boat. It was terribly broken up. We could not make a direct report about it. We had to go through our AIDS verifier because that's the person who does have the light list, does all the checks, and is the one that the person at our ant in St. Pete is going to expect to receive something from.
Well, that's local policy then.
Yes, but the forms are the same.
The basic difference I think is that the aid verifier, someone with the aid verifier qualification has gone through the PQS, been through the process, and then been designated as an aid verifier. And I think it's just a quality assurance kind of thing.
Yeah.
The situation that you described, I'm not sure why a local Coast Guard unit, wouldn't say, oh, we've got an aid that's damaged, let's make a report on up the line. But that may be, in an area where there are a lot of those kinds of things, aids and possible incidents like that, that may just be policy. They wanted to go through an aid verifier.
Excuse me, this is Bill Ackerman in St. Pete area. And
Okay.
if what I've done is I would just call it in to sector or on use channel 16 and contact them if there's something that I see off on the water. I'm not an AIDS verifier, so I don't fill out the form.
I mean, that would make sense to me, but not
I've
everything
done it.
is.
Yeah, I've done it in this area, so
Okay.
it works.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, I
I
have a
appreciate
question.
all of that input.
Good.
Every area is different in terms of, the aids that they have, the number of those aids, how they're, spread throughout the area. So, each area has its own unique characteristics. Rivers are different than lakes and oceans. And, so I'm sure there are different policies or practices in different areas. So it's
I have a
interesting to
question.
hear.
Sounds good. All right. If there's nothing else on chapter 7, you can go ahead, Jim, and load up your chapter 8 slides. Give everybody just a minute here to catch their breath.
I have a question.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Dave.
In order to become an AIDS verifier, do you first have to become boat crew or coxswain?
No, that's an excellent question, by the way. You do not have to be boat crew qualified to be an aid verifier. And in fact, it's one of the things that I just used as a selling point to one of my members here to actually think about being an aid verifier, because you go, if you're an aid verifier, you go on a patrol. Essentially, you're not a guest, but you're not part of the crew either. You're on that vessel for a specific purpose, that being to verify the aids. And so you can get on the water as an auxiliarist without being part of the boat crew program. as an aid verifier.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I'm gonna go hit the head.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, Bob, with chapter 8. Chapter 8 is recreational.
Did
Go
you want
ahead.
to let Dave use the head and then come back? Come back. You want to start a quarter after? I don't know if anybody else has any other questions, but Dave just said he was leaving. If you want to wait, or if you don't want to, that's fine too.
It's your show, Bob.
Well, let's make small talk here. While we wait for Dave to get back, and Dave, when you get a chance, give us a call. But meanwhile, this week we have Jim, who's a staff officer at the division level for marine safety. This coming week, we'll have Peter Graham. Now, Jim, you're in 43. Is Peter in 47 as SO marine safety? Do you know this off the top of your head?
Peter was in 43 after they put 45 and 43 together.
Oh,
Peter
okay.
had been in 45. So my understanding is that Peter has switched from D9 to D8. So he has transferred to a flotilla over on the Mississippi.
And those of you that have heard Peter Graham's name before, he was involved with some of the Coast Guard auxiliaries training for leadership, and did some national classes for, I think he did Aux Lambs. So he's been a very active instructor.
Right.
And the following week we'll have David Klein. Are you here today, David? Let me see if David's here. David is he's like Jim. He's got a lot of plates spinning, and so he has not been able to join us, but we're looking forward to seeing him. Now, this is our last presentation in June. We'll have 2 presentations in July, again on Friday nights. For those of you that are going to join us on July 5th, I hope it doesn't disrupt your family plans. I will be recording it, but with any luck, we have a good turnout there on a week from tonight on July 5th. And hopefully you won't miss out on too many of the fireworks displays. Are you back, Dave Springer? Just
I
nod.
am back.
Okay. All right. With that, take it away, Jim.
Okay, so chapter 8's on recreational boating safety. And this is something I think a lot of us have some familiarity with, at least with certain parts of this. So we're going to talk about the mission. We're going to talk a little bit about the history and the current status. So that includes manufacturing standards, public contact, accident data, public ed and vessel exams, something about state boating law and national boating safety advisory council, and then a little bit about the boat responsibly program. So, and we'll try and move through this fairly quickly. It's about the same amount of pages as we had in chapter 7, but I think it's going to move more quickly. So the Coast Guard mission relative to recreational boating safety. So we have Coast Guard Boating Safety Division, CGBSX-2, and the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and they share this particular mission of boating safety. We share it with the Coast Guard's Boating Safety Division. The mission is simply twofold regarding recreational boating activities. The first part is to use prevention and prevention techniques, if you will, to minimize these 4 things. Minimize loss of life. That's always paramount, right? Safeguarding life is first. So minimize loss of life, minimize injury to persons, minimize property damage, and minimize environmental impact. So minimize through prevention, those four things, but then at the same time, maximize the safe use and enjoyment of U.S. waterways. That's the mission. And you'll see it again. It will come up toward the end of this presentation. So a little bit, very little bit about the history. And Jay went through some of this early history when he did his presentation a couple of weeks ago. He talked about, the tragedies that occurred around the time of the Civil War and beyond. He talked about the Sultana and how really a lot of the early regulation was done on commercial vessels related to steamships, and after that more of the diesel and other kinds of vessels that were used commercially. Recreational vessels didn't get a lot of attention until probably sometime in the 1940s, and then more codification in the early 70s with the Motorboat Safety Act of 1971. And all of that was really designed to provide some sort of limited standard for the equipment that you found on motorboats, recreational boats, and also to look at some way of getting a handle on where these boats were and how they were being used recreationally, et cetera. So they started registering or numbering them. Okay. Today, though, that recreational boating safety program takes a broader perspective on making boating safer for participants, but also for the environment. Department of Homeland Security, which is where the Coast Guard resides now, they used to be in transportation. The Homeland Security is charged with carrying out a national recreational boating safety program with these goals: to encourage the states and territories to assume the major role in boating safety missions. So, because a lot of these things crop up locally, because each state has and territory has different waters, some may be heavy on lakes, some may be oceanfront, some may be Great Lakes, some may have reservoirs primarily. So each of these states has somewhat unique boating opportunities and boating related situations. So it makes sense to get the states and the territories to think about really getting a handle on all of this and assuming the major role in boating safety. And then another goal is to foster greater development, use, and enjoyment of all U.S. waters. And since they're looking at the environment, I would hope that they're also looking at doing more development, use, et cetera, in an environmentally sustainable manner in all of this kind of stuff. So it's the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security then who received this charge, but he's delegated the authority, or she has delegated the authority to the Coast Guard Commandant. So some of the things that are included in this whole effort to promote boating safety. You can start out with the manufacturers, the entities that are building boats, building motors, building the equipment that you put into these boats. And the Coast Guard has detailed manufacturing standards. You see, I put a copy of a capacity plate here. It's a blank capacity plate, but I put it up here not for the sake of the capacity plate, but I put it up here because there is a compliance statement on here. Manufacturers are required to state that the vessel they have produced complies with the U.S. Coast Guard safety standards in effect on the date of certification. So they come up with a design for a boat and they get it type certified. So they have a model of a boat. It has this equipment on it. It has this hull configuration, et cetera, et cetera. It's type accepted by the Coast Guard, and they say, all right, that boat meets the standards, the Coast Guard standards in effect at the time. If something happens that boat no longer complies, or that model of boat no longer complies, or if there are safety defects that develop, the Coast Guard can actually require or repair of those non-compliant or safety defects, okay? And they can do that even after the boat is sold to the consumer. So this is kind of like an automotive recall. They've found something that's gone wrong, and somebody has to make the corrections on that. And others of you out there might know this better than I, but I would think that non-compliance could be something like you have a vessel that's type accepted, and maybe X number of months after they actually have gotten that vessel type accepted, they get a change in the supplier of some part that is, part of a fuel line, part of an electrical system, and for whatever reason, that part doesn't comply with the standards that they had set initially. That, if it's non-compliant, if it's judged to be non-compliant, the Coast Guard could make them do repairs on that, even on existing boats that are already out there. A safety defect might be something like, a fuel line or a electrical line installed fine, meets all the safety standards that it's supposed to, but where it was installed as the boat was being used, maybe there's some friction somewhere, and that particular fuel line or electrical line is subject to abrasion and may become a safety hazard. So it's those kinds of things, again, like an automotive recall. The Coast Guard has a couple of mechanisms for enforcement to make sure that manufacturers actually are not changing things once they have a type acceptance for their boats. The Coast Guard will go out and buy boats and tear them apart, cut them in half, whatever they have to do to make sure that what was accepted is still being done in terms of that particular boat and model. The other thing they can do is to actually visit the manufacturing facilities, whether it's the boat manufacturer or the manufacturer of components that might go into that boat. It allows them to watch the manufacturing process and to work directly with the people who are doing the job there, making this boat or this equipment, and educate them as to what they should be doing. So, all right, another interaction in terms of the recreational boating safety is direct public contact. So we can do this through law enforcement boardings. Coast Guard regularly does these boardings, getting out on the water and finding things that are wrong, reminding people that they need to be doing certain things differently, etc. So law enforcement boardings, coordination with state governments to make sure that they are also keeping on top of things, and then all of the stuff that we do as Coast Guard auxiliary members. And I put a picture here of several auxiliaries who are at a boating safety booth at a boat show or sports show here in the area. Boating accident data is valuable in terms of identifying problems and helping the Coast Guard to develop solutions to those problems. So if you monitor accidents across the country and look at when accidents are happening, where they're happening, why they're happening, are people under the influence, how much boating safety education have they had, were they wearing a life jacket, you know, all of those kinds of things help you to see where the trends are, to identify problems, and then to develop solutions. And these are just a couple examples here of developing solutions relative to intoxicated operation. You can set standards and penalties, and if you're working across multiple states, you can make sure that those kinds of standards and penalties are somewhat consistent across multiple states. You determine that carbon monoxide exposure is a problem under certain circumstances related to recreational activities and boats. So you work to establish safety practices that would limit that carbon monoxide exposure. And if you're interested in, I put a copy of the 2023 recreational boating statistics, which is the latest one that's available, but you can go to this website, uscgboating.org. You'll find that across the top, one of the tabs is a statistics tab. And if you hit that statistics tab, you will get the opportunity to download reports for each of the years that they have reports for that go back probably to about the year 2000, 2005, something like that. I'm not sure exactly how far all of their data goes back. Under that statistics tab, this, by the way, this recreational statistics booklet is pretty extensive. I mean, there are graphs and charts and, you know, it's all of the states and all of the possible things that might go wrong in terms of an accident or an incident. If you are interested in your particular state, you can go to that. Underneath accident statistics, there's something called search data. And you can, for instance, pick one of the topics that, you know, like doesn't wear a life jacket or operator education, alcohol use, those kinds of things for your state, for a specific year, or for the entire range of years that they have. So, for instance, if you're interested in operator education and, you know, what kinds of incidents occur relative to operator education, you will find for your state the statistics on accidents and, you know, how many people actually took a Coast Guard auxiliary class versus no education versus power squadron or state or, you know, those kinds of things. You can search it that way. Public education and vessel exams, we're probably very familiar with those. The goal of these is increased knowledge of safe operations and practices. And they're really very, very similar. Public education deals with a larger group. Vessel safety checks deals with one-on-one boater safety education. And our classes and safety checks are conducted by the auxiliary, the power squadron, and the classes by boating safety organizations and state boating agencies. And I put examples of the two books there. One is my local Department of Natural Resources Boat Wisconsin book, and the other one is the Coast Guard Auxiliaries Boat America, which covers more the national perspective, and then a vessel safety check being conducted. Every state has a designated state boating law administrator. Here in Wisconsin, it's someone who is a DNR warden in an administrative role. And maybe you know who the boating law administrator is in your state. Might be someone in the law enforcement agency. It might be in a different agency. All of these state boating law administrators are part of a national association of state boating law administrators. And I'm sure you've heard the term NASBLA. Our boating safety classes are NASBLA certified. NASBLA sets up certain standards, certain things that should be covered across the board. And then they certify those boating safety classes as meeting the requirements, so that when we teach a course in Wisconsin, the certification is good in other states that also require NASBLA certification. And as I mentioned earlier, some states have, states often have unique situations. So the federal specifies sort of the baseline on things like boat numbering and Coast Guard approval on various equipment. And the states then come along and adopt the federal laws, regulations, and then add their own for unique situations. Boating law administrators promote stronger and more uniform laws across the states. And it makes sense. I mean, we should have laws that are similar from one state to another. They should have similar strength, similar penalties, and they should be uniform as much as possible, because as we go from one state to another, we shouldn't have to learn a whole lot of new things and do a whole lot of things differently. We should be able to do the same kinds of things in Iowa and Illinois and Wisconsin and Minnesota for most things that make sense in terms of safety. So uniform laws and consistency avoid confusion, and they really foster safety across a much broader basis. Coast Guard provides grant money support to the states for their educational programs and for their enforcement activities. And they base the support on how much money and how much resource time, if you will, and effort the states, the territories are willing to put in as their commitment. And they also base it on the number of registered numbered vessels. How many vessels does each state have? You can have states that have a relatively small population. They may have a relatively few number of boats. You can have states that are inland, well away from water or oceans, and something like Wisconsin, Minnesota, we regularly are in the top 5, top 6, 7, 8 in terms of the number of registered boats, comparable to places like Florida and California and Texas. There is a National Safe Boating Advisory Council. It's a 21-member council made up of representatives from the boating industry, state boating safety agencies, national boating organizations, and public boating interests. And the council acts as a consultant body to the Coast Guard. They meet twice a year with the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard, talks to them, gets their consultation on a lot of the issues that they need to deal with. And then throughout the year, the Coast Guard actually works with individual members of the council, whatever's most appropriate. They will interact with individual members of the council to improve manufacturing standards, public education, and operating regulations. So you can see that if they're working on manufacturing standards, they're probably going to be talking to representatives from the manufacturers, among others. Operating regulations, they might be looking to state boating law administrators as a major source of information. And then they work regularly with agencies like the American Boat and Yacht Council, SAE, UL, the Testing Laboratory, and the National Fire Protection Association on various issues. We can talk a little bit about grant money. The Coast Guard distributes grant money to national nonprofit public service organizations for boating safety projects of national interest. And the one that we are most likely familiar with is annual support for the North American Boating Safety Campaign. This used to be called National Safe Boating Week. Started around 1958. And then in the year 2000, Canada joined, so it became international. It was no longer just the National Safe Boating Week campaign. So they changed the name to the North American Boating Safety Campaign. And it's a concentrated program each spring of public information, awareness, and education centered around boating safety. Boat responsibly, another effort. Boat responsibly is a combined and coordinated effort of NASBLA, the National Association of Boating Law Administrators, state partners, the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And the mission is going to look familiar. The mission is the same as the first slide that we looked at, the mission of BSX2 and the auxiliary. It's to minimize, through prevention, loss of life, personal injury, property damage, and environmental impact, while maximizing the safe use and enjoyment of U.S. waterways. The partners work as a coalition, and they work to promote a common message about boating safety. They work to enhance, to establish a greater presence with the boating public. And they work to get a synergy of effort so that they're all working together in recreational boating safety operations. And they, in turn, reach out to other stakeholders to make boating safer, make boating safer. That's industry, business, recreation, government, all of those entities that are involved in boating safety. And the goal is measurable positive change in boater behavior. They have 4 key messages that are accepted by all of their partners. The first one is wear a life jacket. The second one, never boat under the influence. Alcohol, drugs, whatever. Don't boat under the influence. Take a boating safety course and get a free vessel safety check. And how do we, as auxiliaries, support boat responsibly? We support it through getting the message out. We get it out through our classes, our vessel safety checks, our boating safety booths, public affairs missions, our websites, other social media, other existing channels. And that really takes me to the end of chapter 8, but I threw in Rebecca's slide reminding you that IMSEP's an open book exam. You got 3 hours to take 50 questions. You can have your resources there, and you can take the test multiple times to pass. So you've seen that before, you've heard it before. It's just a reminder, you'll be fine. And if there are any questions, I know I went through that more rapidly, but it really is stuff that a lot of us are familiar with. We've had probably more contact with the stuff in chapter 8 than we have in chapter 7.
Excellent. Fantastic. Questions, team? Do you have any questions right off the top? One of the things we touched on a couple weeks ago is there are programs such as the Trident device. Can you share with us what you know about the Marine Safety Ribbon and or the Trident device, Jim? Or maybe we could ask someone else in the team here.
Well, Bob, you set me up for that, right? As I told Bob a while back that I had done a program here talking about the Trident program, the Marine Safety Training Ribbon and Trident program. And so I told him I would put together a few things on it just because I I had some stuff sitting around, and I purposely left this in a format different, Bob, than the the stuff from the IMSEP course, just so it's not confused. But what you're seeing there is an example of the marine safety training ribbon. And in order to apply for the marine safety training ribbon, and you do have to apply for it, it is not an automatic. You have to have one marine safety PQS, so one qualification. And then other prerequisites, but these prerequisites exist for a lot of things that we do in the auxiliary. You have to have ICS 100, 200, 700, 800, and then either 210 or 300. You have to take the IMSEP course, which is one of the reasons why we've been tracking through this, and the Good Mate course. Those are all prerequisites, if you will, to applying for the marine safety training ribbon. And you have to fill out an application. And the application has your information. It has information on when you took the various courses, and one marine safety PQS. So if you've completed MSAM or MES, that would certainly qualify as one of the PQS qualifications. You send that off to the DSO-MS. They sign it, send it off to the director, and eventually your marine safety training ribbon shows up. That gets you involved. That whole process gets you involved in the marine safety training program. And I thought I would talk a little bit about these. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I think we've spent some time on these things already. The Auxiliary Prevention Outreach Specialist, which is the new term, still designated as AUX-MES. It's auxiliary only, deals with basic marine freshwater ecology, pollution issues, laws, regulations, pollution prevention, the Maritime Transportation Security Act, and America's Waterways Watch. It's a self-study. There's a PQS then that you go through with someone who has the qualification, and then there's an oral board made up of 3 people with the qualification. Similar to that is the AUX MSAM, which is newly revised, and I took it before it was newly revised, so I'm not familiar with everything that's in there, but basically it's the Coast Guard and the auxiliaries marine safety structure and function, something about documentation and data management, and again, self-study, PQS completion, and oral boards. If you're interested in that marine safety training ribbon and you don't have any marine safety qualifications, one of these is a good place to start. And then you can go on from there. There are any number of other qualifications. I mentioned that, I have the uninspected passenger vessel qualification. This is charter boats, 6-pack vessels, we call them here. The commercial fishing vessel examiner, that one's a little more involved in terms of getting it. We were doing some local training here, but normally you go to Yorktown on that. And I misspoke a couple weeks ago. I said this was the only, you'll notice there's not an AUX in front of that. This is the only qualification that is the same as the regular Coast Guard gets. And I misspoke. There is one other. The towboat examiner is similar. I believe that is a non-AUX. It's a Coast Guard regular, and we get the same qualification. And then there are any number of them. The key is that you really should not be getting a qualification that is not going to be of use to the Coast Guard in your area. You don't just want to go and get the T-boat inspector qualification if there are no T-boats in your area. I know Rebecca recently completed the pollution responder, auxiliary assistant pollution responder qualification, because she checked with Sector Lake Michigan, and they identified that as an area where they could use an auxiliarist with that qualification. So she tracked through it with them. So there are any number of these. I think something like 20 of these qualifications that are possible based on what the needs are of the Coast Guard in your area. Once you have gotten involved in the Marine Safety Program and gotten a few qualifications, then you may be eligible for the Marine Safety Trident device. So the qualifications are the same as the training ribbon. You've completed those Marine Safety Training Ribbon requirements. But now, instead of one Marine Safety Performance Qualification standard, you need 4. And you need 5 years of service, 96 hours of marine safety activity that falls into the codes of 28, 70, and 80. And at one point, I thought this was almost impossible to do, but it's gotten a lot easier because a number of years ago, they decided they really wanted to put an emphasis on marine safety. And so they opened up a whole lot of codes to us so that as we do these activities, we get mission activity hours. They're not 99 hours, they are mission activity hours with their own code. And they really help your flotilla because flotilla health is judged on the basis of the number of mission activity hours you get per year. So as I mentioned, there are a large number of these codes. Sometimes they include prep time. Certainly all of the training we've been doing here on IMSEP, all of the study you've been doing, the preparation that we've been doing in terms of putting these courses together, all of that may qualify. It's not 99 time. It's going to go under a different code. I didn't put any of the 28 codes on here because most of them relate to actual Coast Guard support at something like a sector, whereas these tend to be more the kinds of things that we can do. But you see, there's a whole lot of areas where we actually can log hours. Sea partners and environmental, for instance, going out and doing presentations to school groups, scout groups, those kinds of things. America's Waterways Watch, the same thing. Here's the training 70U, all of the hours you've been putting in studying for this IMSEP course can go under 70U. And then there are commercial fishing vessel and UPV outreach and training, those kinds of things. So it really doesn't take all that long to get 96 hours a year. 5 years, 96 hours each year, but they don't have to be consecutive. You know, something like COVID comes along, takes you out of the picture for a while, or, you know, something else takes you out of the picture for a while. They don't have to be consecutive years. And then there's an application for that Trident device, very similar to the application for the Marine Safety Training Ribbon. You've got all of the things that you had said you did for the Marine Safety Training Ribbon. Here's your place where you put your four marine safety quals. Here's the 5 years of your 96 hours or more. And then I'm not sure that you actually need, for a permanent award, that you actually need a recommendation from the captain of the port. And then it goes off to the DSO-MS. It goes up to the director. And the device is similar to the coxswain device, the RBS device, those kinds of things. And you can actually, depending on the uniform, you can actually wear 2 of those devices. So you could conceivably have a coxswain device for activity in the operations program, and a Trident for activity rather in the marine safety program. So that's my spiel, Bob, on the Trident device.
Fantastic. Well, we had an excellent question. Melissa was asking, how does one sign up for ICS 210 or 300? There was a time when I knew the answer to this question, but I don't know now. Is anybody on the floor here? Rebecca, do you know the answer to that one? I should know this.
Well, those are FEMA courses, so you can go on the FEMA website and just do those courses online. And it gives you a certificate at the end.
Excellent. Hope that helps, Melissa. Excellent question. Other questions? Oh, I got some more questions popping up here. Hang on. Is the UPV considered a PQS? It is, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it was one of those. A good question, Rich. Yeah, you could just stop sharing if you want to, or if you want to show everybody your schedule, you can just leave that up. Good. Yes. FEMA, good. Thanks, Ernie. All right, team. You want to stop sharing and see where it is on the bottom, Jim? If you want to scroll on the bottom and it just says stop sharing.
Yeah, it doesn't come up actually. Oh, it's up here. It's up here. Let's see, advanced sharing options. Where do I stop sharing?
At the very bottom.
How's that?
Still seeing everything here. See if you can scroll all the way to the bottom of the screen with your mouse and just move your little mouse along the bottom, and you should get a menu on the bottom there. It should say
no, the menu's on the top for me here. And let's see. Advanced sharing options. What is that? Here, how's this? How's that?
Winner, chicken dinner. All right, team, you can turn your cameras back on if you feel photogenic today. And let's go ahead and 210 is an active Coast Guard online course. Okay, that was a note from Chris Strauman. And that was an outstanding, you guys have to admit, we got some really great instructors on this group. And, 45 years, what a lot of dedication. So let's go ahead to the bottom of your screen and let's go to reactions. Where is it down here? Reactions, and let's give Jim the thumbs up for all the time and energy he put into this presentation. Hand claps are also good. Nicely done. Give him the hand clap too. So, and you can turn your cameras on if you want to say hello before we call it a night. That was an outstanding presentation. The bonus was, for a lot of you, you're going to be in a position to earn your Marine Safety Ribbon after this by pursuing one of the PQSs. So, and the exciting thing is, because we're presenting this to people from all across the country, some areas may need pollution responders and some may need passenger vessel inspectors or one of the other T-boat or one of the other PQSs. So we open it up to everybody. Any other questions for Jim? Any other questions?
Well, I don't know about for Jim, but I do have a question for you. I don't remember. I mean, I know last class we talked about potentially having certificates for the course. Are we going to do that, or is that was just talk? Or
after you left last week, we had a meeting and we decided that William Terrell is going to make the certificates. So I'm glad you're here so we can share that information with you tonight.
Fair. I mean, if you get me a template, I'll gladly print them off and mail them.
We'll do it. We will do it, William. Good question. Other questions? Anybody else? I'm going to hit the button that causes us to stop recording.